So we're going to start with a little video that the GEF put together for this occasion. You can also find it on our YouTube channel, the GEF YouTube channel.
Plastic is found everywhere in the remotest corners of the earth and in the deepest depths of the ocean, and is very harmful to marine life and public health and livelihoods. We need to fundamentally rethink the way we produce, use, and reuse plastics to improve the circular economy, which means it doesn't become waste.
Today's economies are dominated by linear approaches to the way products are manufactured, used, and disposed of, which means we extract natural resources, process them into products and packaging, and sell the products to consumers, who ultimately dispose of them.
And that's reflective of our society that is very linear. We take, we make, and we waste.
The GEF has started to address plastic pollution through a circular economy approach, which means eliminating the production of unnecessary plastic products, shifting to alternative materials and circular designs, extending the life of products through reuse, repair, resale, and rent, and finally recycling discarded products back into the production phase. We are working from the global to the regional to the national scale, and doing so through public-private partnerships.
The new plastics economy global commitment is targeting the elimination of single-use plastics by the year 2025.
Partnering with Global Environment Facility, Circle Capital is an impact investment firm. They have raised $100 million, and they tend to deploy this money to support the waste management and recycling business in Surabaya to advance the circular economy. We want to encourage this sector to become financially viable.
Over 250 global businesses, governments, and civil society organizations have signed up.
The GEF recently announced a commitment to work with countries throughout Southeast Asia to develop national and municipal action plans.
Plastic waste generation become more and more challenges to our country. So government of Indonesia has taken some important policies. We have set up the target to reduce the marine litter is 70% by 2025.
At Unilever, we have the ambition to actually by 2025 to be able 100% having a fully recyclable, reusable or compostable plastic packaging. And Unilever also put a target of 25% recycled content into our packaging. This is how we want to implement the circular economy into our plastic packaging.
The New Plastic Economy Innovation Prize was launched in order to fund startups who design substitute products for packaging.
We won the Innovation Prize back in 2017. We have two products, seaweed-based Elo Jello cups and seaweed-based packaging to replace single-use and small sachet packaging. Just because it's edible doesn't mean that you have to eat it. We just want to show people that it is very safe. When we talk about replacing plastics, this means we have to find a resource that can be in a big scale, right? There is not going to be deforestation, and also seaweed only takes about 45 days to cultivate.
There is a growing groundswell of businesses, governments, and civil society organizations that are making commitments to address marine plastics. And the hope of the Global Environment Facility is that more partners will join this groundswell.
The Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy, PACE, launched by the World Economic Forum and co-chaired by the GEF and Royal Philips, is catalyzing this model among businesses and governments in sectors such as electronics, food, fashion, and plastics. PACE launched the Global Plastic Action Partnership to bring countries and industry players together around efforts to tackle this plastic pollution, with GEF investments already initiated in Southeast Asia and expanding worldwide. The challenge is huge, but the GEF will continue to do its part to step up its investments in circular economy initiatives, working through partnerships with the public and private sectors at national to global levels.
Oh, it's already there. Okay, welcome again. Good afternoon, and thank you so much. This is a great turnout. As you can see, we are bringing more chairs, so we're very happy to see that we have such a turnout. This is the second part of the GEF consultations with civil society, and as we announced in the morning, is on plastic pollution. So without further ado, I want to give the floor to Claude Gaston, who's the manager of the programs unit at the GEF Secretariat.
Good afternoon. It is a great turnout. It's very nice to see a lot of people interested in this topic. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the GEF to this session. My name is Claude Gaston. I'm the manager of the programs unit at the GEF. When you think of it, it's hard to imagine our life without plastics. But as we're seeing from the film, and as well as what we're learning from science, it's probably time that we start imagining that future. There are many good signs that this future might be possible, and that momentum may be shifting. This film shows many efforts already underway, from global efforts such as the Platform for Accelerating Circular Economy and the Global Plastic Action Partnership to local efforts of cleaning up beaches. In fact, Saturday was World Ocean Day, and not surprisingly, the topic of the day was marine plastics and plastics pollution, raising awareness worldwide to this very important issue. Many countries are also taking this issue seriously. Recently, the UK announced national plans or national bans of single-use plastic, and just today, Canada, the country of which I'm a citizen, said they will be looking into this issue as well and hopefully issuing a ban for 2021. During the GEF 7 replenishment negotiations, plastics came up as an important topic very late in the game. For that and several other reasons, it was not possible to include plastics as a standalone major program. But we know that plastics and pollution is a very important topic to at least four of the focal areas of the GEF, from biodiversity, international waters, chemicals and waste, and also climate change. We were able, however, during those GEF 7 final negotiations, at the request of several council members, to include a dedicated set of resources to invest in key projects to stimulate countries to adopt actions towards addressing the issue of plastic pollution. We committed to invest strategically in a few marine plastics projects over the course of GEF 7, with the goal of removing 50,000 tons of plastic from the oceans. We have several concepts under development, and as you'll see in the work program that will be presented tomorrow at Council, and if adopted, we will already have surpassed that commitment that we set upon ourselves for GEF 7. Now, as we try and figure out the best entry points for the GEF partnership in this very complex issue of circular economy and marine plastics, it's important that all GEF stakeholders help in providing us and countries with the best thinking so that we can be most impactful in how we use our precious resources in GEF 7 and beyond. Thank you, and now I'll introduce Leah, who has been the coordinator and lead within the GEF Secretariat on marine plastics. Leah.
Thanks so much, Claude. It's really impressive, the turnout we had. Thank you all for joining. The goal of our session today is really threefold. It's to raise awareness of practical solutions to addressing plastic pollution. It's to share experiences among all of us here in this room. And ultimately, it's to inspire action when we all return to our offices in a few days. So there are kind of three key messages that we hope you'll leave with. One is, of course, the critical role that CSOs play in addressing plastic pollution around the world. Second is the importance of a circular economy approach. And you can see you're already organized by the three phases of circular economy: production, consumption, and waste management. And finally, the power of private-public partnerships. We'll start off here in plenary. We'll have a stage-setting panel, and if we can go ahead, you guys might as well join up here. That'll convey the state of solutions for this issue, and then we'll break off into the three simultaneous breakout groups that are around production, consumption, and waste management. Each group will discuss for about 40 minutes, and during that time you have a facilitator and a note taker, as well as 3 or 4 pre-identified contributors and who will be speaking from their experience. But we want to emphasize the importance of all of you contributing and sharing your lessons that you've learned, both the good and the bad, on addressing plastic pollution. After 40 minutes, you'll then rotate. Here we go, counterclockwise, to the next phase of the life cycle, and then rotate one last time. So you'll each get an opportunity to be in each of the groups. We'll then turn back to plenary, where we'll discuss finance, how to finance all of the solutions that have just been discussed. And then we'll have concluding remarks, and finally the launch of the Small Grants Program publication on plastics and circular economy. So again, we have a wealth of knowledge in this room, and we really want to take advantage of that and ensure all of you are able to participate. And if you have more to say, please remember to join the reception at the end, where there can be more informal dialogues. So we'll now turn to our first stage-setting panel, which will be moderated by Lauren Gesnas, who you may know as Norway's representative to the GEF Council. She is also the project leader on marine litter at the Norwegian Agency for Development Corporation, or NORAD, and she's been interested in plastics, or the topic, ever since she wrote a research paper on it in high school. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Can you hear me? I would like to welcome all the people who are standing by the entrance. I think there are more seats available here. Yeah. As you may already know, the issue of plastic pollution, and especially marine litter, plastic marine litter ending up in the oceans, is a very important topic for Norway. We are aware that this event today is focusing on plastic pollution in general, but in our view, plastic that comes into nature often is likely to end up in the ocean at some point. A clean and healthy environment is key to economic development, to poverty reduction, food safety and food security, and for safeguarding people's health and well-being. People in developing countries are more directly vulnerable to environmental challenges, such as plastic pollution. Fortunately, there's a global momentum to demand action, and the momentum is obvious when you see how many people are attending this event today. We know that there are also a lot of initiatives popping up and efforts to combat the issue of plastic pollution, and we believe this is really important, as there's a lot of work to be done. Norway believes that there's a need to translate this global momentum into a new global agreement to combat marine litter and microplastics. Currently, there's no multilateral agreement that addresses the issue of marine litter and marine plastics and microplastics in a comprehensive and integrated manner. We need a dedicated global agreement to support policy making and to prioritize our efforts and put the financing where it really matters. Last year, Norway established a development assistance program to combat marine litter and microplastics. Our government pledged $200 million over the next 4 years to support developing countries in addressing this issue. Our main focus is on waste management in coastal areas and near rivers. We are partnering with civil society organizations, with multilateral organizations, and also with the private sector. As Claude mentioned, during the negotiations for GEF 7, our country, together with other donor countries, emphasized the issue of marine plastics and the role of the GEF on working in this issue. We believe that the GEF should address the issue of plastics through its work in the international waters focal area, but also in the chemicals and waste. So I was very pleased to be asked to chair this event today, given all this background, and to engage in a conversation with our experts here in the panel, but also with the audience later on. I would now like to give the word to Emily Woglem. Emily has deep policy experience, having first led the Ocean Conservancy's government relations team. She is now the executive vice president of the Ocean Conservancy, where she has emerged in strategic direction of the organization and works closely on the plastic pollution agenda. And I believe that Ocean Conservancy is one of the first global CSOs that has been working on this issue, starting 30 years ago with the Trash Free Seas Challenge. So Emily will join the podium, and she will give us, set the stage and highlight the crisis and the solutions from a circular economy perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this working? Thank you for that introduction. And Ocean Conservancy has been working on this issue of marine debris for over 30 years through the International Coastal Cleanup. But I think what you'll hear from all of our panelists is that many civil society organizations and private sector entities have been working on this issue for a number of years, which is wonderful. We obviously need help. We need multilateral institutions. We need governments. We need more CSOs, more private sector to be part of the solution to solve this problem. But I think it's really wonderful to have such leaders already in the space, active and engaged, and providing examples and good work that we can all build off of. It's not just Ocean Conservancy, obviously, but a lot of the folks who are here on stage with us today. So just to sort of set the scene, hopefully everybody, this is Marine Plastics 101, Ocean Plastics 101, hopefully everybody's familiar with. But really a breakthrough in our understanding about the magnitude and scope of the issue came in 2015 when Dr. Dena Jambeck and her colleagues published this article in the journal Science that for the first time ever put a number, an estimate on how much plastic is getting into the ocean every year. And that number was roughly, order of magnitude, 8 million metric tons. That is such a huge number that we tend to like to have these kinds of figures to explain what that means. 8 million metric tons a year is the same as one garbage truck full of plastic every minute of every day over the course of the year. That's a massive amount of plastic. And we know that it is already starting to have really significant impacts on marine species. In fact, over 800 marine species have been demonstrated to have been affected by plastics. Sometimes that's through entanglements, sometimes that's through ingestion. And we know that plastic in the ocean is nearly ubiquitous, that it is in the deepest trenches, in the Marianas Trenches of the ocean. There was just good research on that came out this week. It's found throughout the water column, on beaches, and in Arctic sea ice. It's literally everywhere. We find it, that picture in the far right, we find it in the bellies of the smallest plankton, and we also find it in the bellies of the largest whales. So we know that the plastic is merging with the biology of the ocean, and what we don't yet know is exactly what that means in terms of impacts. But signs are troubling. So, for example, there was a research study that pulled fish off of market shelves, so fish that were being sold for human consumption. 25 to 28%, depending on the location of that fish, had plastic in its bellies. So a lot of research to be done still to understand what that really means for us, but it's certainly not good. And frankly, beyond just the marine impacts, we know that increasingly waste has become a global commodity. It's traded and shipped around the world to be processed for reuse or discarded. And that long journey increases the risk of leakage along the way. It also transfers the management burden to manage the waste or to landfill it or dispose of it in some way. With China's new policies around banning the importation of unprocessed waste, we know that there's now an even bigger issue with the remaining waste that's not being managed, that's not being recycled, and questions about where it's ending up, particularly in countries that don't have domestic infrastructure and capacity to deal with it. Beyond this, we know that Plastics is a great example of what you saw in the video, right? Which is the implications, the impacts of our linear economy and our consumption patterns. So that really we are creating pollution and ecosystem impacts throughout that entire linear chain. So pollution and climate impacts from the generation of the material, the extraction and the consumption of the material, and then biodiversity and water impacts when that waste is discarded or improperly managed. So, as Leah said in the video, which was great, by the way, this is not a sustainable model for our future. The current linear thinkings of make, take, dispose is just going to continue to compromise ecosystems if we continue to follow this path. And what we're here to talk about today is how we get to this future of a circular economy, where waste is designed from the beginning out of the system, where products are designed to be reused, to be recycled, and to not generate waste in the first place. And I think the video mentioned there's a whole series of places throughout this cycle where we can intervene. It's about the design of products to be recyclable. It's about there are certain products we simply don't need and can get rid of. And it's also about making sure we have the infrastructure in place to collect and recycle the materials that can be collected and recycled. So I think this is the frame we want to use as we have this conversation today. I think the other frame that we want to make sure people think about as we're talking through these issues today are the different roles that each of the actors in the room can play. We need governments to create enabling conditions, to create incentives and regulations. We need the private sector. There's a huge role for them to play in innovation and in research and development of new materials, new technologies, new business models. And frankly, there's an incredible role for the civil society organizations to continue to play in terms of advocacy, engaging consumers, and frankly, convening and bringing together these conversations across the different sectors. So I'm excited to hear the rest of the panel discussion, and I think this is hopefully a good framework for us to have these conversations as we go forward throughout the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. So, since this is a CSO event, we should hear from some CSOs. So I would like to give the floor to Froylan Grata. He's the Asia-Pacific Regional Coordinator for the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, GAIA. He's a committed environmental justice campaigner who has assisted more than 20 cities in the Philippines in developing and improving waste management programs and systems. So Froylan, could you tell us a little bit how civil society organizations can work on the issue of plastic pollution, and also what should governments do with this issue, and how can you collaborate with governments? Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Jeff, for inviting us here this morning. So when we talk about marine plastic pollution and countries like the Philippines or Southeast Asia, this might be a common picture that would come to mind, especially with the report which identified mostly Asian countries as a primary source of marine plastic pollution. But this is not the story that we wish to tell the world right now. This is the story that we want to tell you. All over cities and communities in the Philippines and Southeast Asia and Asia, communities have been trying to address this problem for the past 20 or 30 years now. This particular example is a community in Metro Manila, which grew tired of trying to manage their waste through the traditional system of collect and dump. So the picture on the left are their old transfer station where waste is collected temporarily. When they shifted to a zero waste program, in less than 3 months, they were able to change this into the pictures to the right. And based on this, more cities in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and even in India are trying to work on this right now. But these are just some of the pictures of what's happening. What's really happening is communities are taking charge of the problem and showing that they're not only part of the problem, they have the solutions. Here, waste pickers are involved. They work with the cities, with their villages to collect waste, all types of waste, to ensure that, as our CEO of GEF this morning said, the moment that plastic has reached the ocean, it's already too late. And this is what these communities are trying to prevent, to ensure that waste, plastic especially, would not reach the ocean. Next, please. So what we are trying to do with this zero waste cities is to really identify the problem. And part of it is really knowing the types of waste that we produce in this. Here, you will see organics, which comprises about 60% of our waste, is returned into the environment through composting. Through this system as well, we are able to recover as much recyclable waste as possible, as much as allowed in that particular community. And what is typically considered as trash, we don't hide it in the landfill. We don't burn it in an incinerator. This program allows us to really identify these problematic products and packaging and come up with solutions that are appropriate for these communities. It could be banning certain materials like plastic bags, for example. It could be redesigning. For example, sachet is a very prevalent problem in Southeast Asia. Can we redesign the packaging so that we don't have to use the single-use plastic packaging? EPR, we are exploring that, as well as encouraging corporations who are producing these problematic products and packaging to explore alternative delivery systems. So these stories are happening right now, and I'd love to tell you more later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Froylan. So now we will hear from Amina Abdullah. She's the chairwoman of the Maldives Authentic Craft Cooperative Society and is managing a GEF small grants program called the Platik Nun Gote, which seeks to reduce the reliance on single-use plastic. She is also dedicated to improving and empowering women engaged in home-based work. So maybe you could give a little bit of information on this project and also on how you're engaging in your country, how the civil society organizations are engaging, and also together maybe with governments, or what could governments do? Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. As you may know, Maldives is an island nation, 2,000 islands and 190 islands inhabited. So there's more water than land there, and plastic pollution is a huge issue there. Also, our economy relies on tourism. So a lot of plastics are on the beach, and also fish is our main staple food. So imagine if the fish eat plastic and we are eating plastic in a way. So our civil society organization, we feel that there is a dire need to work on plastics. So right now we have been working under a GEF grant, like more on awareness and also finding alternatives to single-use plastics. Although we work on towards reducing single-use plastic bags, we do work on single-use plastic bottles and all sorts of single-use plastics. Our government does not have good regulations on recycling, or neither. The government has no recycling program or enforced regulation on the use of plastics. So, and also we feel that the government need to work on this. And the Environment Protection Agency is also part of the ministry. So we feel that the Environment Protection Agency need to be independent so that we can work on plastics and other environmental issues. The Environment Protection Agency is now endorsing OXO biodegradable plastic bags. They are having a logo on it. So we are closely working with them to say that it is not biodegradable and to stop using their logo on it. And another thing is we hope to continue our work even if the project ends, because now at the moment we are working only on the capital island. We would like to share this with the other islands as well, so that there will be more plastic bans in the whole country. And at the end of the project, we would like to share our lessons with the government so that there will be hopefully a national ban on plastics. That is what we are aiming for, and hope we will be able to do that. At the moment, our CSO have been invited to be on the technical committee for waste management, and we see that there are things happening with the work that we are doing currently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina. You're talking about plastic bans, so this is a very nice transition to our next panel member. Caleta Mwanafunzi is the council member for Eastern Africa in the GEF. She's also the Director General of Rwanda Environment Management Authority, and she has been championing plastic waste control and advocating plastic bans in the region. So as probably a lot of you know, Rwanda was the first country in Africa to have a ban on plastic bags, and now you have Kenya who have joined, and very recently Tanzania as well. So maybe Caleta, you could say something about how you managed to get that ban, and how you're working also further to have a ban on single plastic use, and how you've shared that experience with other countries in the region, and how you have maybe collaborated with some civil society organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rwanda started the ban informally back in 2004 with the cabinet directives. Then the law came in 2008. But we started by sensitizing our people to indicate what are the impacts of the plastics. Of course, it was obvious, detailing all over the place, and the people were using plastics in almost everything. Water, milk, everything was packaged in the plastics. But I want to bring it into this, and by then it was only Rwanda in the region, and thank God now we have Kenya and Tanzania recently joined, so we are together in the move. But I want to share what are the barriers specifically when you ban and you are alone in the region. Of course, you have free movement of people and goods, you have to trade, so it's really challenging. But I always believe there is a point to start, and who should start? Okay, then you see the move that everybody's joining. So you have also different people in their mind, they are used to package everything in the plastics, so mindset change takes time. So you need the civil society to help you, you need everybody to come on board, sensitize our local communities. Of course, I'm saying this, if you only deal with the supplier side, meaning manufacturers, then you don't tackle the issue of, this other side of demand, then you don't get where you want to go. So we try to sensitize our people to indicate how bad is the plastics in their lives. And the people started to actually demand the supplier to control their, or to change their designs. And some actually came in on board and changed their designs to include the sustainability component. I want to give an example of the telecommunication company, MTN. If some of you have visited Rwanda, you could see their airtime cards usually used to be wrapped in plastics, but now they don't use plastics, and they have proved to save their money. So they are ready to move on. Of course, when you look at what I liked in this, we had also opportunities out of this, and I like the ban sometimes triggered the opportunities. We have many investors that came in to work on alternative for packaging materials. So we have people moved also for recycling, because the ban doesn't mean you eliminate all the plastics in the society. So we have invested more. Investors came in and invested in plastic, in alternative to plastic use, and the others invested in recycling plants. And this has proved to work very well. And I think where we are heading now, we have moved to single-use plastic ban. We have already the law already approved by cabinet now under parliament, and I think it will go well and have the single-use plastic ban on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caleta. And I think that's also a very nice transition to our next panelists. Jennifer Ragland is the Senior Director for Government and Stakeholder Relations at Coca-Cola, where she works on environmental issues such as plastics. Previously, she was with the U.S. Agency for International Development, based in D.C., Central Asia, and Afghanistan, as well as working previously for several NGOs. And Jennifer has worked also with many international NGOs. So from the business perspective, what would you say are the biggest barriers and the biggest opportunities facing governments, and how can these be overcome? And what kind of incentives can the governments put in place for the business to shift,
Great, thank you. As we're getting the slides up, let me just first say, first and foremost, it's fantastic to be here with this esteemed group of civil society representatives and government representatives, and I really look forward to the dialogue this afternoon. think we're putting up a slide. There we go. Okay, next slide. All right. Well, wonderful. What I wanted to do just in the brief time here first, and I'll get into those questions, response to those questions, is just talking through a little bit where Coca-Cola has been in terms of the reduction of plastic pollution and waste. Sustainable packaging is not new to Coca-Cola. We've invested significantly over the years around design and innovation, from everything from like lightweighting of bottles to introduction of the first PET bottle to the first recycled material bottle in the early 90s. So we've done that. We've worked a lot on recycling, a longstanding partner with the Ocean Conservancy as well, and invested significantly in collection and recycling facilities around the world. But clearly it's apparent we're all here today because this is a huge, massive issue that's reached an apex, and we need to get together to really solve the problem. So with that spirit, we knew that we need to double down as a business and really set forth an ambitious goal. And that's what we did with World Without Waste, which we launched last year. And it has three main pillars to it that are all time. We have goals and targets that are time bound associated with that. The first is related to design. Obviously you need to start there in terms of the reduction of petroleum-based plastic. And also recyclability. We have a recyclability goal that by 2025 of 100%. Right now we're at 88%. And so that is something, as we evolve as a business, we're seeing some challenging packaging formats. You mentioned the sachet or pouch or cartons. Those are things that we're focused on. Recycled material. So this is a big one in terms of in terms of making sure that we have the material, first of all, that's able to go back into our bottles. Collection. This is the heart really of this. We've invested significantly both in bottle facilities, but making sure that for every product that we put out in the marketplace that we collect that. So today we're at 56%. And partner, there's so many partners here in the room that we've worked with before. And I will just say, as we launched our World Without Waste initiative, we really consulted heavily around, what should be the data, what's the state of the data, the rate of transparency, where should we be pushed? And I just would encourage you guys to continue to do that. That makes us a better company, and it's part of the dialogue that we're having today. Just next slide, please. So we'll talk about this, there's so much going on. I would say a big takeaway in terms of not only what the company is doing, but what's exciting about it is that there's a lot of pre-competitive work that's happening. We're partnering with our competitors. We're partnering with our peers. If we're going to look at system-wide change, it needs to be at that level, across design, collection, and partner. And we'll dive deeper in the interest of time later.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And thank you to the panel. I would now like to open to the audience, and I would like the audience to share their experience on the work on plastic pollution, and also see if they have any questions to the panel. But before we do that, while you're thinking about your questions and how to share your experience, I'd like to call on a few people. First, I would like to call on Rolf Piehl. He's the Executive Secretary of the Secretariat to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention. And probably a lot of you here know that there were just a few COPs where there were many decisions that were taken that are very relevant for this issue, especially in terms of the Basel Convention. So I thought maybe he could share a few points with us. Thank you. Rolf?
Thank you very much. And indeed, the stark images of what we've seen here this afternoon is what, in fact, is prompting governments to really take action on the issue of plastics. And for those of you who don't know, the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Wastes, which is a long name for a convention, it's been around for 30 years, celebrated 30 years this year. It was primarily designed to avoid and to protect countries from receiving hazardous waste from other countries, and with the issue of dumping and also the issue of sending waste to those countries. And this convention operates on a prior informed consent, which means that if you want to send waste to country B from country A needs to advise country B that I'm sending you the waste, and country B says, yes, I can receive the waste and I can manage the waste in an environmentally sound manner and not dump them on land or at sea. Now, the issue is that plastics is being traded around the world, both for bona fide recycling, but also as part of dumping as well, unfortunately. And there's been many dumps around the world, which is increasing every day with the amount of plastics, and of course, the environmental problems that follow this increase in the mountains of plastics ends up in the sea, and the problems you see here. The Basel Convention puts the onus on the country to engage in the management of waste. So the issue of plastic debris in the ocean is a result of the failure of countries to manage their waste. And that, I don't want to put the blame only on governments, but also us as individuals, as consumers, through lack of awareness, through lack of understanding on how we use and dispose of plastics. We have plastics that increasingly accumulate in the ocean environment and other environments. Now, at this conference of the parties, which was about 4 weeks ago, parties through a proposal from Norway about a year ago, proposed amendments to the annex to the conventions. Now, the convention has different annexes, which underneath is under those annexes are listed different kinds of waste materials, primarily hazardous wastes, destined for both recycling but also for final disposal. And under the listing of plastics under the convention, it was not seen as a hazardous waste or as a waste that needed to be controlled. What the amendments to the convention has made it now, it is, once it comes into force, is that countries will now to report on the plastics that they're exporting for recycling or otherwise to country B to which they're sending the plastic. This has, of course, numerous ramifications, because then the countries that are sending the plastics to country B will need to ensure that they declare the type of plastics they're sending, whether it's PET or other types of plastics, but also the plastic is clean and not contaminated with other waste, which of course which is happening now, is a lot of the waste that has been sent for recycling also gets contaminated with other types of waste. In 1 minute summary. Now, the other decisions that the Basel Convention took, which are of course very, very important, is of course they agreed for the setting up of a partnership on plastic waste. And this partnership is not only open to the generators of waste or solid waste management, but also for NGOs and CSOs involved in marine plastics as well, and in CSOs involved at the front line in recycling activities. And before I finish, I just wanted to say that we have a very strong collaboration with UNDP SGP program, the Small Grants program, and in fact we've been talking now on how to engage. In fact, their latest publication had different examples of activities by NGOs and community-based organizations involved in the recycling of plastics and other wastes, obviously, and we're looking at how we can scale up and how we can learn lessons from these initiatives. I will finish here by saying that the GEF is a very important partner with us, although the Basel Convention's financial mechanism is not with the GEF. The GEF has two important focal areas, which is the international waters and the chemicals and waste focal areas, and we're hoping through discussions that will happen over the next couple of days and future discussions that will be able to identify very clearly how the GEF will support action on addressing the issue of marine litter and of course the global issue of plastic waste. Thank you, Lauren, for giving me the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Rolf. I would now like to turn to Julian Wright from DFID, who could tell us a little bit about the work of the UK on the issue of plastic pollution. Thank you. Shortly.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. So from the UK, we had in November, I think 2017, we had a TV show called Blue Planet 2, which some of you might have seen, which completely changed the landscape for us in terms of the public perception of the problem of plastic waste and therefore the political attention to it as a vote winner. So we very quickly had to come together with an announcement for what we were going to do. So in April 2018 at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, our Prime Minister Theresa May announced a 61.4 million package of support to address the issue. Now, in terms of what we're doing, I think we connect with many of the things that the panel said there. I think the first one is we're government, from a government perspective, it's around policy. So we are partnering with Vanuatu and leading the Commonwealth Clean Oceans Alliance, which is a commitment of, so far, 25 Commonwealth countries that have committed to take steps to ban plastic bags, to remove microbeads from personal care products, and to take other steps to manage their plastic waste. So getting the government policy framework in place. The second element is working with businesses. We realize that our contribution, even with the contributions of Norway, many other countries getting into this area, the GEF, it's not going to be enough for the scale of 300 million tons or whatever of plastic that's produced each year. It's a drop in the ocean, sorry. So what's needed is for business to take a stand, take a lead on this. So we are supporting the Global Alliance, the World Economic Forum Global Plastics Action Partnership. We're working together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others to make sure, bring the industry together to share best practice, to do what's right from a business perspective. And now the third, and this is really important for my organization, the Department for International Development, is the bottom line is many people rely on plastic waste for their livelihoods, especially very vulnerable people in our societies. And I think what's going to be really important is that the things we do at the big scale in terms of policy, government policy, in terms of what industry does, manages livelihoods, manages sort of the very vulnerability of these people. So what we're doing, the third element, is doing pilot projects, working with industry to try and translate those commitments that may be made by organizations such as Coca-Cola on the ground into how to keep jobs and improve jobs for those that are collecting plastic waste. So thank you. Thank you, Julian. And Julian, you mentioned the Global Plastics Action Partnership from the World Economic Forum. So I would like to give the floor to Kristen Hughes, who leads the GPAP. If you want to say just a few words before I open up to the audience. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you as well. Actually, it's really lovely to be here. And interestingly, a lot of partners in the room, so I appreciate that as well. The Global Plastic Action Partnership is created, as was mentioned in the video, out of the PACE work at the World Economic Forum with the support of the UK government, Canada, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dow, and Nestle. And so what the program is looking to do, the partnership, is we're building a platform that brings together best practices, knowledge sharing, so that actually people can learn from one another as we're looking to create those business shifts and government shifts. So what are the policies that we've heard alluded to today that are needed, but also how do you make sure that everybody is in that loop as we're looking to make these changes in the space of marine waste. And so I think it's really important, and I loved the makeup of the panel and the different anecdotes that came out, because I was thinking a question I would even throw out and is how can organizations like mine work more closely with civil society? I think it's very easy for us to reach out to some of our government partners at times and bring them into the fold. I think it's equally, we've got a lot of great partners taking leadership positions like Coca-Cola, and yet there's so many organizations in the room that are looking to do great work or already investing in doing good work. And I'd love to find a way to bring you into our partnership and our program and our platform. No doubt there are some great lessons and learnings that we could take on board and then share across with others, as this program, again, is not an issue that is just isolated to one country, but it's not just one region. It really is a global issue that we are trying to tackle, and the best we can make those connections and drive that knowledge sharing would be hugely helpful. And so I look forward to learning from all of you today, and I thank you again.
Thank you very much. I would now like to open up to the audience. If you have any questions or experience to share, we have a few minutes before we break up into groups. Can someone facilitate with the microphones? And please present yourself before asking the question or sharing your experience. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Madin Tlekhalidi, the RFP from Southern Africa. Thank you for the very, very rich, wealthy information, if I may say that, from our panelists. But if I can ask, before the policy being put in place. Before the strategy, we need conscientizing people, the outreach, the communication. Can you please say something on that? Because I think that's the first step on taking this activity. And we'll catch up. Thank you very much. I was impressed of what you have just said. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll take 2 more questions before we let the panel answer.
He has an experience.
Can I share an experience, please?
Yes, thank you.
Oops. Very good afternoon. Thank you. I don't know where to begin and where to end. But very interesting. Thank you very much. And I'm from India, Sodi, and I'm based with the UNDP and small grants. Now, the experiences which were shared from colleagues from Gaia and, of course, from the panel sitting there. We in India have forged ahead a partnership program leaning on to the experience we did with the small grants with my colleague here, Ali, and his case studies in the small grants program booklet, which is going to be released very recently. We are not setting up an alternate mechanism, but we are working with the government at the city and at the national level. And the program is funded by your sister partner, that is the Hindustan Packaging, Hindustan Coca-Cola Packaging, and the Unilevers. So what we are trying to invest is the 4 issues which were flagged very strongly. The first is to work with the governments and set up a system which is more systemic in nature and which brings along the government within the system of traceability of the waste, how it flows, and the investments to be made into the waste pickers who are the heart of the whole program, the colleague from DFID said and the colleague from there. Really providing an opportunity for the skills, the jobs, and the incomes in it. And that's what the main aim is. And then lastly, of course, building a traceability from where the waste comes and where the waste goes so that it can anchor into the position that it needs to go, building onto the circularity of the whole program. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that experience. Yes, we have another question here. Please go.
Yes, Nick Starling, Skyscraper Farm. This is more of a question for Coca-Cola, I guess. One of our full-size 52 stories, Skyscraper Farms make about 4 million pounds of produce a month, using 99% less water, replaces about 602,343 field acres worth of farmland a year for just one skyscraper. But my question is that is a lot of produce going out, and a lot when you go to the grocery store, when you buy salad components, whether it's the tomatoes, the small tomatoes, the cherry tomatoes, or the kale or the spinach, it's all in plastic containers because people have to be able to see what it is. And the only we're a startup. We're looking at a couple of different places to build right now. We're finalizing contracts and everything, but we haven't found a way to replace the plastic component other than glass, which is obviously really expensive. So that's cost prohibitive. So if you could answer how we can fix that. Like we've heard of like seaweed sort of as a container, but like a seaweed derivative product. But I haven't found anything yet, and we don't have the infrastructure to go looking.
Thank you very much. So I'll turn now back to the panel. So, Caleta, there was a question, I think that's more addressed at you. You know, before implementing policies and agreeing on policies, how do you make people aware? How do you raise awareness and get people engaged? That was from Southern Africa. And then for Abdullah and Amina and Froylan, maybe you could say something about how civil society organizations could engage with the World Economic Forum. And then Coca-Cola, you just had a question on alternative packaging, I guess it was. Thank you. Do you want to start, Caleta?
Thank you very much. I think communication is very key. I agree with you. And how we did, I want to share experience on how we did it. We actually started, we normally have every Saturday, end of the month, Saturday that is end of the month, we have community work Umuganda, we call it in our language. So the leaders meet with the community at local level and discuss different things, and so we normally do that to clean up the place. So it was like cleaning up, taking out those plastics that are in the water bodies, in the soil, in the drainage systems. So it was one way to sensitize our people to show that this is the impact of plastics and the littering practice. And again, we actually, if I remember well, the World Environmental Day last year, I think it was Beat Plastic. Yes, beat plastic pollution. And we started actually sensitizing our people on how to use the water dispensers in our offices, in our homes, and we mobilize the other institutions in their offices to use water dispenser instead of having these bottles. So we are sure that when the law will come in place on the single-use plastics, people will be aware of what are the issues and how can we deal with these impacts. So we sensitize through radio, TVs, programs. If you have come to Rwanda in the flight, you could hear telling people, if you are going to Kigali, it's a country that is plastic free, please don't take plastics there. So we communicated to our people and tried to educate them so that they can take the lead to ensure that we are the country that is plastic free wastes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caleta. And now Froylan and Amina, and also Emily, you would like to say something about how the World Economic Forum, for example, could engage with CSOs. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think the first step is really to recognize that they exist on the ground. I think for a lot of us, there's a disposition to work with well-known CSOs. Like even in the logos, you see the popular ones, right? But the reality is that small groups exist on the ground and they actually know what's happening. For example, when a company makes a commitment that they'll make their packaging recyclable by 2025, a local group would tell you it's actually meaningless for an island setup. Currently, even PET bottles are not being recycled in these islands. So just making something recyclable doesn't mean it will actually be recycled. Right? So we have to recognize that these knowledge, these experiences work on the ground, and even small groups can contribute. Right.
Thank you. Very good. Amina, you would like to say something?
I think it will be very useful for us to partner with you all because the government needs to know more on the recycling and also on policies. So knowledge sharing would be very good, I feel. Yeah. Thank you.
So my answer was actually in regards to the question around engaging citizens, not the World Economic Forum. But so I just, two examples that I think I would highlight. One is I think our colleague from the UK gave a great example of how the arts community, whether it's through TV, whether it's through media, this is such a visceral issue that I think has really, we've seen where that's captivated attention and really motivated citizen. The other one I would offer is that Ocean Conservancy, we've been working on this. We've been leading the International Coastal Cleanup for 30 years, where we engaged over 1 million citizens around the world in hundreds of countries to come out in early September to actually attend a beach cleanup. Nothing gets you engaged and thinking about your plastic footprint like actually picking it up off the beach or out of a waterway. And we take children, we take local mayors, we take company executives, put them on a beach and have them pull out plastic and actually clean up some of the trash. It's a wonderful way to engage people around that. We have local partners in many of the countries around the world, and so would encourage you to connect with us and to look us up online as well.
Thank you very much, Emily.
Just
yes,
a quick build on the comment on just because something is committed to make recyclable doesn't mean that it's actually you can recycle it. Yeah. I completely agree, and that we have to be very careful about, and that's also why we're careful about sequencing with our communications in terms of, we want to make sure that is done in a way, one, that first of all that consumers have an opportunity, that there's a collection system that exists, and then once that becomes available, then they know how to do that and they understand exactly what's required. So that totally 100% agree. On the alternative materials, happy to talk in more detail about this. We have invested in a few things over the years. Plant bottle is one that it's essentially a PET bottle. It's made of 30% plant-based materials. That is, I mean, this is in the bottle format, but it has been used by other competitors, everyone from Nike to P&G, 60 billion bottles in total, and we're expanding that around the globe. So that's one element. In terms of your dilemma, in terms of the packaging itself, I think, everything's on the table right now. Packaging and then package free, which we didn't even get to in terms of alternative beverage delivery systems, from Freestyle to, I can talk in more detail about what that entails, but ways in which we can help provide and support the full circular economy, whether it's, packaging on the go, or it's people that, want to reuse, or just making sure that we meet the consumer where they are. So we can talk offline.
Thank you very much. I would like you to thank the panel before we break out into groups. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Susan Waithaka. I work at the GEF Secretariat with the Policy Partnerships and Operations Program. I'm a country relations officer covering Africa, and was working on this with Leah and Pilar. We now have discussed plastics in general, plastic pollution solutions from the perspectives of CSOs, government and the private sector. Now we need to move to more specific experiences by focusing on each of the phases of the plastic life cycle. Now, when you came in, we had tried, when we thought we wouldn't have so much interest, to organize ourselves in 3 round tables, as it were. Now we're a little bit mixed up, but we still have the round tables. So over here on this side, we have the production. We have the production roundtable, which will be facilitated by Leanna McManus. There she is. And then we do have a timekeeper, because we want to hear from as many people as possible. So we're being really strict about time. If you saw me, I was sitting invisibly there trying to keep time. So we have production at this end. So anybody interested in production, there's a panel that will be facilitated by Leanna. And after 40 minutes, you will then circulate to the next table. So the next group is here in the middle, and that is the consumption roundtable, which will be facilitated by Sulen Chen with note taker Sarah. Where are you? Sulen is right there, and Sarah is roving somewhere. There, Sarah is right there, and she'll be the timekeeper. And they will discuss efforts to extend the life of products through reuse, resale, repair, rent, as well as awareness raising. The third group, waste management, at that corner, which will be facilitated by Alex Grabowski. She's raised her hand, with the note taker being Stefan. He's the tallest man in the room. And they will discuss waste collection. They will discuss waste collection. So each of the groups has 3 or 4 identified experts, but this is a CSO consultation. So we encourage as much as possible the opportunity to hear from the CSOs. CSOs who are here, please speak up and participate, and we need to hear from you, so we listen to you. At the end of 40 minutes, the group here will move to the next table. The group waste management group, except for the facilitators and the experts, will move here and will circulate. You will hear this sound to indicate that it's time to move. And then at the end of that time, then we will come back here for the final exciting finish to this whole afternoon. So please, let's go on. Let's move to our tables. Try and sit in round tables for the different groups.
Without tables.
Without tables.
Round groups.
Excellent.
Production, consumption, and waste management. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Could you please take your seats? We're going to go now into our financing panel. So please, everybody, take your seats. Please. Let's start taking the seats now. Back into plenary is the last session of this theme of plastics pollution. Thank you. Well, we have now just in these three groups discussed about circular economy and solutions from the private sector, civil society organizations, community-based organizations, and we all witnessed a very lively conversation in the three breakout groups. Now we're going to discuss in the financing panel, how do we pay for this? I mean, is there money out there? So the person who's going to moderate this financing panel is Anar Mandani. Anar Mandani is the director of the Environment Division at Global Affairs Canada, where her team is responsible for managing global programs related to environment and climate change. Anar has 20 years' work experience in the field of international development, including working at the Aga Khan Foundation, UN World Food Programme, and the Canadian International Development Agency. I'll give the floor to Anar now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you and to be able to learn and hear so many different perspectives on this really important issue. From the Canadian perspective, this is an issue that has been growing in prominence, and probably the most apparent visible sign of that was our G7 presidency last year. And our Prime Minister had actually highlighted oceans and marine litter as one of the pillars of that presidency. So as part of that, we had an Oceans Plastics Charter, and that Plastics Charter includes ambitious action and targets to improve the life cycle management of plastics in the economy. And so far, 21 governments have signed on to it, as well as a whole range of different private sector companies, and the list keeps growing. And so our engagement to date has been underpinned by the fact that we recognize that there has to be a variety of actors that are involved in addressing this issue. And it has to be happening with action at both the international and national level. And so from a domestic point of view, I think we started this whole afternoon event with the announcement that Prime Minister Trudeau just today announced that Canada will be banning single-use plastics by 2021. So this is a major step for the government of Canada, but also from an international perspective, we have been working to make significant investments in preventing plastic waste from entering the oceans. And we have so far announced $100 million for a marine litter mitigation fund. And so this is a significant investment that we've made so far, but it isn't enough. And I think that we recognize that this is just one small step in a large number of actions that need to be taken by a wide variety of actors. And that's the premise of today's panel that we have here on sustainable financing. And we have a number of different actors who are here who will be able to give their perspectives on how to finance action in this area. So the first speaker that we have is Rob Kaplan. Rob is the founder and CEO of Circulate Capital, which is an impact investment management firm dedicated to reducing plastic pollution. Rob's expertise is both impact investment as well as corporate responsibility, having previously served as the sustainability director for Walmart. So Rob, in addition to highlighting the work that you've been doing, the specific question that we have for you is, what do you see as the financial future of plastic waste? Can zero waste be self-financed?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for sticking around this late in the afternoon and all your amazing contributions throughout the day. It's been quite a conversation. So, as you heard, Circulate Capital is an investment firm. We focus on incubating and financing companies that can prevent plastic pollution, specifically in South and Southeast Asia. We finance startup waste and recycling companies that are working with the informal sector to collect more material. We're working in helping build facilities that can sort material. And then we also finance recycling facilities that turn that material and plastic waste into goods that can be used for manufacturing. We think about it as a whole value chain. Our model is unique in a couple ways. We manage capital for many of the world's largest corporations. Our backers include PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Danone, Dow. And they have asked us to help them deploy this capital into ways that not only prevent plastic pollution, but are catalytic in nature. And so what we recognize is that it's going to take a lot more than the $100 million we've raised from our corporate partners. It's actually going to take billions or tens of billions of dollars for waste and recycling infrastructure to be built across South and Southeast Asia. And the only way we're going to have access to that level of capital is if large-scale institutional investors view investing in waste and recycling as normal as they view investing in bridges and ports and roads. And what we found today is that many of them are not participating in this space. So our strategy is not only, as I said, to prevent tons of plastic from getting into the environment, but it's also to show that these interventions are scalable, replicable, and bankable. So the question that you asked was around the financial future of plastic waste and self-financing. So one of the challenges that we've seen is that kind of depends on whether you're looking at the full value chain when you think about self-finance or just one portion of it. And a lot of people think about plastic waste and solving that as just a collection problem, right? And the questions are, can you self-finance the cost of collection, which is often the most expensive part of a waste management system? And oftentimes that is hard to manage, and it's very difficult to self-finance just through covering the operations of it just through private capital. So there is an absolute requirement and need for both public and private sector investment in this space, because there are parts of this value chain that are public utility, and they're not going to be a for-profit business that investors are going to be chasing to put capital into. However, there are parts of this value chain that are, and they're interrelated. So while collection can be quite challenging, recycling and manufacturing can be quite attractive, but they're integrated and they both need financing and support. So one of the ways we've been able to do this and try and create that kind of impact is we announced just last week a blended finance partnership with USAID, where they are guaranteeing a portion of our loans that we can make in these markets. So if we, they are now actually guaranteeing up to 50% of our potential losses from our debt portfolio, which allows us to take on more risk and finance more projects that would otherwise institutional investors would never touch. But because we have some downside protection from the public sector, we're able to deploy capital faster and in a more impactful way. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. Our next speaker is Dorothy Hare. She is the Manager for Oceans and Climate Change at the Global Marine and Polar Program at IUCN, and she is leading the IUCN's international policy engagement on marine climate change issues. So, Dorothy, for you, it's the same question. So, what do you see as the financial future of plastic waste, and how much do we need philanthropic and government support? Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. First, I think you heard the word climate change more in my introduction than waste, and I think that is sort of the combination or the synergies I want to share about looking for innovative and sustainable finance, because we and myself, I'm working with something called the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility. So what we do, basically the step before what Rob told us about, is that we are looking for projects that work towards bankability and want to become investable, but still need to take some investment hurdles. So we have some grant money to support projects actually come to that stage where they can involve with the impact investment space. And we are driven primarily by the climate change impact. So we want to reduce climate change mitigation and adaptation through the restoration of natural resources and natural solutions, but actually trying to see how we can bring in the private money through different revenue sources or different revenue streams. And that is where actually the plastic comes into game as well. Because I want to show you, tell you briefly about two projects that we're engaging with. One is actually in the Philippines, where the sort of three different revenue streams that we're looking at is actually recycling end-of-life fishing nets. So the fishing man coming, bringing back the discarded fishing nets, and it's actually being recycled by nylon producers in Europe and then sold for global carpet producers. The second revenue stream is about sustainable seaweed farming, similar to what we've seen in the movie this morning, the little clip earlier. And then we're also investigating actually whether we can use carbon credits through mangrove restoration or better management. And that's, for us as IUCN, again, why the question that we are involved in innovative finance is because this whole project is embedded in marine protected areas, no-take zone, and sort of the conservation aspect that is linked to bringing in the private sector, or hopefully down the line. A second project in Haiti that we're actually exploring whether we're gonna support it is also a waste to energy project, and it's about waste collection and actually the production and sale of biogas, where it's about going to communities, collecting the waste. A second revenue stream is about generating solar energy, and then again working with the carbon credits. And again, it's the prevention about waste going into the ocean, the conservation aspect, and then linking some of the revenue streams generated through the waste to energy to actually support some of the mangrove conservation efforts. Then to the question, and well, Rob answered the first part very well, so I'm going to go to the need of the government and sort of philanthropic support. And I think for the role as IUCN and others in this space, I think the support from governments and philanthropies in actually helping ourselves as IUCN and others to create these enabling environments for these type of ideas to happen, for baseline information to come together, and actually sort of helping some of the standardization that needs to happen in this sector, which again others are more competent to talk about than me. And I think the other part is again the support from governments and philanthropy in generating solutions. So I think it's about the dialogues and the demonstration projects. So it's not just the one that I mentioned that links climate, plastic and conservation, but also other projects that IUCN and many others are doing, and actually showing some of these demonstration projects in the circular economy. And I think the other one is also about tracking positive impacts. I think that is something, again, not just on the plastic side, but in general, where we need to work on and have some alignments, how we can actually show progress being made in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Our next speaker is Arun Abraham, and he is the Senior Environment Specialist with the Asian Development Bank. He has 25 years of experience in financing natural resources management in Asia and the Pacific, of which 12 years have been associated with the GEF. So in addition to highlighting work that the Asian Development Bank is doing in this area, Arun, your specific question is, what do you see as the role of governments to scale up investments and make this area self-financing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anar, and thank you to Leah and the GEF for organizing this very important event. Plastics pollution has historically not been high on the agenda for ADB, but it is now. And this is being led internally through our environment thematic group, which operates like a community of practice. At the annual meeting of the Asian Development Bank in Fiji last month, we launched an action plan for healthy oceans and sustainable blue economies. And attached to that is a plan to establish an oceans finance facility with a view to invest up to $5 billion over the next 5 to 6 years. The plastics pollution issues fall squarely within the agenda, the Strategy 2030 of ADB. We have 7 operational priorities, of which one is related to climate change, disaster management, and environmental sustainability. And all of these align well with the GEF strategic programming directions. The types of things that ADB will be looking to invest in the future that are related to plastics would be, firstly, to look at integrated solid waste management, which brings in circular economy principles. Historically, ADB's approach to solid waste management has been quite traditional. And now we're trying to expand that away from, exclusively end-of-pipe types of solutions to go upstream. Secondly, more emphasis on policy-based lending to our developing member countries. This would be to help them develop standards, regulations, legal frameworks, etc. Thirdly, we would integrate this into our very large urban and water program, looking at urban planning and infrastructure, and in particular land use planning, land use policies, materials flows, waste reduction, waste minimization. Fourthly, sustainable and smart agricultural value chains. This is an area where we would want to invest, particularly to address issues related to the use of plastic films. And fifthly, through our private sector operations department, to look at supporting socially responsible investments, in particular looking at the food and beverage industries as well as ecotourism to try and transform materials management. Sixth, looking at alternative high-tech approaches to reduce, replace, or find alternatives to plastic use. And finally, trying to support innovative market transformations. One of the things that's been floated at ADB is to set up a regional market for recycled plastic resins. With the GEF, we have two initiatives that are being proposed that are relevant to this forum. One of them is we're working very closely with the ASEAN Secretariat, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. Thailand is the chair this year. Vietnam will be the chair next year. So we're developing an MSP that would look at three main things. One of them is to help government develop and implement government-led action plans. This will be in coordination with a number of actors, including the governments, but also the World Bank, the GPAP, which you've heard about, the ASEAN Working Group on Coastal and Marine Environment, and other partners. The action plans wouldn't just be national. Some countries have already launched theirs, like Indonesia. Vietnam is preparing to launch. Some are less advanced, like Philippines. They're just discussing how to structure a roadmap. The action plans might be at the provincial level or the city municipal level. Finally, we have another initiative in China where we're looking at working upstream with in the Yangtze River belt to Yangtze River economic belt, Yangtze River Basin, to address issues related to agricultural plastics. Time is up, so my final comment to answer your question is the role of governments is really to provide the enabling environment, the policies, the regulations, looking at hybrid approaches, a policy mix of penalty, market-based incentives, etc. But also to create opportunities for investment and really to help to work with CSOs in particular to increase the bankability of investments in the infrastructure that Rob has referred to in his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Arun. Our next speaker is Delphine Ari. She is a senior environmental engineer with the World Bank with extensive waste management expertise, having previously worked for the International Finance Corporation and the Inter-American Development Bank on waste management initiatives. So Delphine, the question for you is the same. What do you see as the role of CSOs and governments to scale up investments and make this self-financing?
Thank you, Anna. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations for being still in the room. It's nice to see that it's still pretty packed, so we are trying to keep you awake and interested in the discussion. So thanks to Leah for inviting me to this discussion. So just a bit of context before answering the question that Anna is asking about what we're doing. So obviously addressing marine plastic is strongly linked with our mission of ending poverty and ensuring that the prosperity can be shared in a sustainable way. And to do that, we are advising governments investing in infrastructure and policy reforms, on the solid waste management, on recycling, on transitioning to the circular economy, and also working on the upstream aspect of how we can reduce plastic generation, waste generation. And we are also developing partnership at the national level, at the regional and global level. I'm not going to enter into details because I've been told to manage my time. So, but just to give you some numbers, we have invested more than 4 billion in solid waste management in the last decade, and we are planning on increasing our efforts. I'll come back to that. Stopping the plastic leakage by improving waste management is crucial on land and at sea, but it's not enough. And it is essential to build a circular economy where products are designed and optimized for reuse and recycling, and waste becomes value. We've had a lot of interesting discussion this afternoon. Another way to look at the problem is also to look at pricing. In other words, how can we incorporate societal costs, for example, greenhouse gas emission, externalities from pollution, into the cost of plastic? And accurately pricing plastic will lead industries to reduce non-renewable resource use, develop recycling technologies, and greener alternatives to plastic. So this requires the right enabling environment, and I'm coming to your question, Anna. It requires the right policies, reforming regulation and frameworks, and also investment from institutional, like the World Bank and other multilateral, like the ADB, for example, to help also change behavior from consumer side and from the producers. So a big part of the challenge in addressing this issue is that there are so many different players with so many different motivations involved in the discussion. But they all have to come together and do their part to get to the solution. So this is what we're trying to achieve, working with the private sector, for example, plastic producers, to develop new products on the civil society side. Also, the manufacturers and plastic users need to switch to reusable material and waste reduction solutions. And to get this to happen, the public sector needs to create the right conditions. Dorothy spoke about the enabling environment, which is exactly crucial. So this we can do through a number of activities, and this is what we do when we work with governments. For example, introducing carbon pricing or ban on single-use plastic. For example, as of today, about 171 countries have some level of bans of different materials. It's also looking at tipping fees in waste management or other fiscal instruments, for example, extended producer responsibility, which can cover the societal cost of waste management. It's also helping government developing standards on material composition or working together at the regional level, as it was mentioned by Arun, on the creating recycling markets for and making viable and financially viable in particular. So civil society, and that's also something I wanted to mention, is also a key partner for us when we engaged in private sector or when we engage with public sector in waste management investment. And just to give an example, in Morocco, for a project that we've been working on to support the government reach their target to have recycled content from 5% in 2016 up to 20% in 2022. So we have supported them to modernize their waste management system, and working also with waste pickers and waste pickers organization and representative from their community. Traditional trash picker, previously they were scavenging in unsafe condition, and we have helped bringing them together, for example, in a recycling cooperative to sort about 2,200 tons of waste a year. And that includes a lot of women. About 50% working there were women, which have benefited from this collaboration. And this, we cannot do it alone as an institution. We have to do it with civil society, and it requires consultation and participative process to engage in appropriate manner. So to conclude, private companies, individuals, civil society, and governments at different levels will all have views on these different solutions. But at the end, we all need to come together to have an effective actions. So this has to come with partnership. And partnership, we have mentioned earlier the Global Plastic Action Partnership, which was an initiative from the World Economic Forum, which is, an initiative from the World Economic Forum. And we're very proud of being part of this discussion. We also have established a new ocean-themed program for the blue economy, which has a big focus on healthy ocean and healthy communities. It's called ProBlue. And thanks to partners like Canada and Norway in this room today, we have raised about 150 million. And we're very happy that this will contribute to help us continue our work with countries and with different stakeholders into this to overcome this plastic challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Delphine. The last speaker that we have is David Antonioli, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Verra, which is a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organization that manages standards for reducing GHG emissions, improving livelihoods, and protecting natural resources, which is expanding to plastics. So, David, the question that we have for you is, how will countries benefit, and how can they help facilitate the creation of the plastics credit market?
Well, thank you, Anar, and thanks to Leia and to the GEF for organizing this event and for inviting me to speak here. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's certainly great to see that we have as many people in the room still at this late time of the day. So let me just give a little bit of background of what we're doing, which I think is relevant to answering the question, and a couple of key words to think about. So, we think about market incentives, upstream, downstream, and supply and demand, and I'll explain what I mean by that. We're going to be launching an initiative called the Reduce, Recover, and Recycle Initiative, working with a number of partners, including Danone, Nestle, Veolia, Tetra Pak, Conservation International, and a few others, to launch this initiative, which will really strive to embed and create incentives along the supply chain for the reduction of use and reduction of plastic, but also for to drive finance towards activities that are going to collect and recycle plastic that would have otherwise remained in the environment. And really, we're planning to do this by developing two independent standards that will help drive these. And what I mean by that is, if you think about kind of the upstream side of things, we're going to create a corporate reporting standard that will help corporates measure and report their plastic footprint and identify means through which they can actually reduce that plastic footprint. So that can be anything from increasing recycled content to phasing out use of plastics, any number of things, and that's all has to be worked out. But the idea there is to create incentives and reporting mechanisms through which corporates are able to credibly report on their plastic footprint and measure the outcomes and get recognized for efforts that they do to reduce that plastic footprint. Now, no matter how much and how successful any corporate is today, and probably into the near term, you're still going to have a residual plastic footprint that many corporates are going to want to reduce or even neutralize. If you're familiar with the concept in carbon crediting, where a lot of companies are now not only meeting their science-based targets, but they're going beyond that and becoming carbon neutral, we believe that there's a number of corporates that will want to do that. So if you think over on the downstream side or the supply side of how you enable corporates to do that, we're envisioning a standard, we're calling it the project standard, that will enable and drive finance towards activities that are going to create financing for projects that are going to recover and recycle plastic that would have otherwise been in the environment. So we know already that there's a number of activities kind of on the ground already where people are out there picking out the plastic that has value and it's being recycled into some products. That means that people pick out one product, they leave the other stuff in the environment. So we're trying to add value and economic value for that waste plastic to encourage folks to recover it and send it out to some responsible final disposal. Ideally, it's recycling, but not all plastic will be able to be recycled. At the very least, it'll be disposed of in a proper landfill. But that's the idea, to create an incentive system and a market structure that works all along the supply chain. So to answer your question, how would governments benefit? We see this as a critical element to start to create models for how you can finance activities all along the scale, whether it's small scale, waste picker, community-based initiatives, or whether it's the financing of new recycling capacity or infrastructure. It could really play all along the different levels of interventions that you could see. And of course, a really good example that is happening right now. It's in Colombia. Allow me the divergence into this, but it's my favorite example these days. In Colombia, currently, the government has imposed a carbon tax. It's currently at $6 a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. But the government has given the folks that levies this tax on the ability to surrender a carbon credit that meets a certain set of criteria, and we're one of the standards that's been recognized as part of that. So what's happening in Colombia now is that a lot of money and finance is being driven directly towards activities that are conserving forests in a way that's very efficient and driving change on the ground without having the government to receive that money and figure out how to then distribute it back out again. So it's a very efficient mechanism, very elegant, and kudos to the Colombian government for having thought about this. But the interesting thing about it is that it's an interesting model for how regulation can happen, and we've heard some discussions about how this could play out in the plastic space, where government may impose some sort of EPR scheme, extended producer responsibility scheme, but give corporates who may be subject to that or liable to that the opportunity or the option of investing in a project activity that generates equivalent amount of activity on the ground. So it's early days, but I think there's a lot of opportunities for how this could play out, and you can create incentives all along the value chain, all along the system to help solve this problem, which in the end is eminently solvable, right? I mean, we know we can do this, and hopefully we can get there pretty soon.
Thanks very much, David. So before opening it up for a couple of questions, I just wanted to make a comment that the 5 speakers came from different perspectives, but I think that the underlying message in what they were saying was the importance of partnership, and that we each have a role to play in addressing this issue. It's a different role, but we have to be working together to be able to bring whatever comparative advantage we have to be able to move this issue forward. So we have a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to open it up and we can see what you'd like to hear more about.
Merci beaucoup, Bemagado.
Thank you very much, Demagado, for the NGO STAD in Togo. We are doing recycling for plastics and training for the environment. I am very happy to see panelists that talk about funding and financing. So let me go back to what I was saying. I am Domagado. I am from the NGO STAD. I come from Togo.
STAD and I come from Togo.
Nous travaillons dans la collecte et recyclage des déchets plastiques et l'éducation à l'environnement.
We're working in collection and recycling of plastic waste and education to environment.
Okay. Et je suis heureux d'avoir les panélistes qui parlent de l'argent. Et c'est fondamentalement ce que nous, les organisations de la société civile, nous avons besoin pour pouvoir vraiment...
We need financing in order to speed up our activities in the field because we have difficulties for supporting the government to maintain their objectives for managing plastics.
On this, it is essential to talk about the financial resources and how to make them available to enable this approach.
Mais ce que j'ai constaté, la plupart des...
What I saw is that most of the investors and partners for development were more in Asia, whereas Africa is really struck by the question of plastics pollution. We would like to have more investments in our countries so as to have consequent investment.
Public side working with them tend to develop initiatives and pilot things in Asia And I want to encourage you to come to Africa because we have a very strong need for this to happen.
Et donc, moi, je serais intéressé vraiment à travailler avec.
And I would like to work with you on the issue of recycling and reusing that the gentleman offered.
Working on the theme of recycling, reusing that the American NGO has raised.
Okay, merci.
Thank you.
And I just want to say that there is interpretation, but not everybody had a headphone, so that's why we used Francoise's good French and English.
Any other questions from the floor? Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Bichan from Thailand. I would like to ask, especially when you talk about the finance, plastic pollution, I think it's the from municipal waste, but in terms of the municipal waste management, especially for the developed countries, is very important. For the plastic waste, only maybe 10 or 12%. That's the composition of solid waste in general. But in terms of finance, I would like to ask, especially for the development bank, how you do you think for the management of the waste and the plastic waste, how can go together as waste management? How can do that, especially for the developing country. We are facing with the plastic pollution, especially for the Asia Pacific region. How we can solve that problem?
Merci pour la question. Thank you for the question. That was a very relevant point. And what I wanted to say is that, you know, what we're trying to create is a market that's going to be agnostic as to where it happens. So we know that the biggest source of the problem is in Asia, but you know, we're very encouraged by opportunities that we can see happening in other parts of the world. So the way we plan to build the standards, and certainly I think what would apply here would be the project standard, the demand or downstream, the supply or the downstream part of the equation, is that you know, we plan to essentially develop the draft rules, and we will put them out for public comment. But a key part to this is identifying pilot projects that would use the rules to help inform our rules. So to that extent, I invite you to follow this process, and we can touch base later, and anybody else in the room for that matter, because we will be looking for concrete project opportunities that will help inform the development of the standards so that it's the best that it can be. So that's very encouraging, and we certainly see that. I think in the end, from a market-based mechanism, what will be successful will be folks who are entrepreneurial, have the opportunity to recover and recycle waste at scale, and that's what's going to be able to generate the impact that we need. But in the end of the day, what we're trying to build is a results-based mechanism. And so, you know, if you have good opportunities, well, that's wonderful. Let's try to make those happen.
Thank you, sir, for your question about how to start. So there is an engagement possible at different levels. In some countries, the first thing to do is to get the baseline, to collect the data, because in a lot of countries, we don't have accurate data on what is the magnitude, and what are the volumes, what are exactly the pathways, what are the sources. So developing a baseline that would help to identify actions that can be taken to address, let's say, the top 5 or the top 10 plastic or the top 10 litter that are found on the beach or in the waterways, or that are clogging the waterways, for example, could be a good start to develop action plans and roadmap for the countries to move forward. And just to go back to your comment, if I may, on Africa, I think that I absolutely agree with you that the approach has to be global, and Asia has been highlighted in the past thanks to, or not thanks, I don't know, to some research. I think that countries in Asia are taking some leadership, and a lot of lessons learned will be available for other countries to jump in. And in Africa, I think also the context is different, and there is a need to do some leapfrog to reach to another level and avoid that in some countries where the problem is not there yet or is becoming a problem, that maybe working on the policy on the reduction side right now may help to do some leapfrogging.
Yes, just if I understood the question from my colleague from Thailand correctly, because the volumes and the composition of waste are very different in Asian countries, the approach is also very different. So what ADB has done is looking at a lot of waste to energy types of investments, but the integrated approach would look more at diverting or reducing the pressure on landfills to divert waste away from landfills. So it wouldn't be just to look at plastics only. So plastics would be one stream, but we also have the materials recovery, the metals, and things like that, and also very large volumes of organic waste that go into a huge composting market. So there's three kind of streams of value opportunity there. And for my colleague très distingué de Togo, il peut parler avec la Banque de Développement en Afrique, our African Development Bank colleagues.
Thank you very much for your interest. I see that there are more questions from the floor, but unfortunately, I think the time is up for this panel, and we have to move on to the next item. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you so much, on our panelists. So now we would like to give the floor again to Lauren and two CSOs, actually, Lucia from Mexico and Hassani from Antigua and Barbuda. So they have been taking notes about the discussion, and they're going to wrap up with some of the key messages from today's this afternoon discussion. Lauren.